Welcome to the first edition of Garden Path. We were snowed out many times, rained out, hurricaned out, but here we are on a beautiful day. And today's episode is all about Fletcher Steele. Who is Fletcher Steele, you may wonder, when there's a street named after him in Milton? Fletcher Steele was a very well-known and popular landscape architect that did most of his work from the 1920s to the 1970s. He did a lot of work in Milton for the private homeowner that was extremely wealthy. He did hundreds and hundreds of gardens in the state of Massachusetts, and of those hundreds of gardens, only a few exist today. So first there was Frederick Law Olmsted that everybody knows. Then there was a landscape architect that was named Warren Manning, who came after Frederick Law Olmsted. And Fletcher Steele was an apprentice under Warren Manning, and he's often considered the pioneer of American modernism in landscape design. So today's special episode is at the home of Daryl and Amy Roberts on School Street in Milton. There are actually a couple of gardens that Steele designed on School Street, but today we're at the private home of Daryl Roberts, and he's going to give us a private tour of his garden, which is also on the Open Days tour for the Mass Conservancy coming up soon. So welcome, Daryl. Thank you for opening up your amazing garden and amazing home. So tell us about what we're standing in front of and what you see.
Christine, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here to show you my home and my garden, which is a great Fletcher Steele garden in Milton. My wife and I got this property in 2004. And, like every Milton resident, we wanted to have a great Milton house. And when this came on the market, we jumped at the chance to get it. The principal driver was the fence. We thought the fence was the coolest fence we could find. We knew nothing about who designed the fence or who designed the house, but we wanted to have a chance to own a great Milton property. What we found after that is that the person who designed the fence and the great gardens which surround the entire property was Fletcher Steele. And over the period of 14 years since we've owned the place, we've spent a significant amount of time restoring the property and bringing it to where it is today that you'll see.
Well, great. Let's take a walk in. Tell us about this amazing fence. As Daryl mentioned, this was designed by Fletcher Steele. This garden was built in the 60s, and it was one of his final works as Fletcher Steele passed away in 1971.
Fletcher worked on this house from 1954 to 1964. And when he found the property, it was principally the scale of the house that you see, which is fairly narrow. And he thought that the house should have a much more welcoming entrance. So he designed this herringbone brick path and commissioned a fence to give scale and weight to the property, because it's reflective of the strength and weight of the gardens which are behind. There used to be a very large oak tree here. And so even though right now the fence looks wonderfully balanced, it was a practical design to have two entrances on either side. Fletcher's intention was to have the entrances take you to the house, and then subsequently from this narrow triangular front garden through the front doors, through the foyers, and to the window at the back of the house. He wanted the viewer to get both the scale and welcome of the outdoor. So the design of the front entrance is all about inviting the visitor to the treasures in the back.
And there is a major treasure in the back. So why don't we take this conversation to the fabulous garden in the back, but we're going to take you right through the front door, because what Fletcher Steele liked to do is bring the outside inside. Steele was born in 1885 and passed away in 1971. He was born in Rochester, New York. He did his first garden in Andover, Mass, and it's called Rolling Ridge, and he did that for Ethan Allen, and it is a magnificent, sprawling fountain structure. His most famous work is Namkeg out in the Berkshires, and he did that for Mabel Choate from 1926 to 1929. But when he started working on the Namkeg garden, he never really left and worked on that garden until 1959. He had a definite style, and he loved cascading elements. He liked symmetry, as Daryl mentioned. So here we are in Daryl's beautiful Fletcher Steele garden with its wonderful stonework, symmetry, and cascading. So let's talk about this place.
Yeah, this is really exciting for us. When we found the garden, it certainly was not in this condition. What we found were crumbling walls leaning on diseased birch. What we found were no dramatic plant life. In the tiers here, we found there was a grassy knoll on that side, tiers of stone and more grass, and it was barren on this side. What we wanted to do was bring back the garden to a way that made sense for us as a modern family. Fletcher did 25 gardens in Milton. On this street alone, we are one of two. And what we found in Fletcher's work is clearly symmetry. But what we also found in Fletcher's work is really, he paid attention to the needs of his client at the time. From 1954 to 64, while he did this garden, his client was a woman called Helen Gilbert. She was a contemporary of Mabel Choate, a Nomenkeg. And so some of the elements that we found here were also in Nomenkeg. On this center terrace, he had roses on the cinquefoils off to the side.
When you say cinquefoil, are these?
Yes. What the cinquefoils are the cedar planters here. They are 3 loops, smaller ones on the side, and then a larger circle on the outside.
And these are original to this garden. And what did you find under the shed?
Yeah, it was fun. While we were restoring the garden, realized we needed new ones of these. My son found, while he was crawling under the garden shed, a whole cache of them. Wow. So whenever we now need to replace them, thanks to Fletcher, we have extras to go and replace and upgrade the garden.
Does it have to be small enough to get under there?
Or we can get someone to do it for us, certainly. So for us, what we found were 2 sets of cascading birches on either side of this center terrace. And they were diseased. We found evergreen, low-growing evergreen in the center, but they also were in terrible shape.
Were those original to the garden, the evergreens and the birches?
They were not. Helen Gilbert was someone like Mabel Choate, had multiple homes. This was her primary property. However, she summered in Nantucket. So Fletcher designed a planting scheme which was incredibly colorful for the first part of the spring, and then colorful for the latter part of the spring. So here he had a variety of colorful plants and irises. He also had a ton of roses in various places throughout. What we found were evergreens, as I said, and roses, and nothing here. We discovered from Fletcher's writings to Helen Gilbert what his intentions were. Our intention was to make it work for our family. We wanted color in the center. So we've put in anything from peonies to irises, some original irises from Fletcher Steele, blue indigo, there's deutzia, there's wine and roses, wigelia, and a number of other colorful plants which move through the entire season in the center. We also wanted to really create the sense of rooms for the garden. There are 3 rooms in the upper terrace. There is, the living and dining room, there's the garden room, and then there is the western lawn. In order to create a room, we thought verticality at the ends was probably much more in tune with what we wanted. So we sought vertical evergreen on either side, while allowing the color to flow through the center.
No, that was a great choice. And one thing Fletcher Steele would do when he was considering a design, he looked at the landscape and he looked at what would be the best view and then build his structures around it. And in several of his gardens, he did use rose bushes. He did that at the Spalding Garden over on Fletcher Steele Way, and he did them here, and he even inputted a lot of roses in Namkeg, but they weren't a variety that withstood the time, and they've all gone. Today there are rose varieties that are much hardier for our zone and would have made it. So he would be all about what works for your family. So Daryl mentioned that he's got a seating area, and that wasn't always a seating area, but he had to adjust that to be good for his modern family. So why don't you tell us what you did with that?
Sure. As I said, there was a terraced lawn space here where it was bordered with irises and other evergreen on the edges. And because Fletcher designed the property to actually have a lower lawn, we thought it would be best for us to have a place that we could come as a family to both relax and eat. So when we fixed the granite walls, which were crumbling, instead of replacing them with lawn, we replaced them with a terrace space that we can now enjoy the outdoors. Fletcher loves symmetry, and the upgrades that we focused on also focused on having it be symmetrical. As I said, similar to Nomenkeg, there were cascading birches coming down the center terrace, which were to invite the viewer to look deeper into the yard. The birch framed what are sunburst locusts on either side. Then they are subsequently invite the viewer to look deeper into the yard to see columns, and then much deeper into the yard, Fletcher put a statue of Persephone, the goddess of spring, consistent with Helen Gilbert's desire for springtime to come to her garden.
Now, don't we all want spring? We've waited for it for a very long time this year. And one of the most famous images of a Fletcher Steele garden is that cascading waterfall at Namkeg, and it does have the birch trees that go down gradually, and they've all been replaced, and it's a stunning, stunning view. So if you do have an opportunity to get out to the Berkshires, you should go check out Namkeg.
Well, for us, we were not able to replace the scale of birch trees when they invariably died in our terrace. So to honor Fletcher, what we did was move them off the terrace and put 2 birch trees on either side of the terrace on the lower garden to continue with Fletcher's ideal of both symmetry and using the same plant materials that he intended, but taking it down to a scale that is much more sustainable for the tree. It's not growing in stone, but also much more to the scale of what our needs are as a family in terms of both maintenance and utility.
Another thing that Fletcher Steele did is he left behind extensive notes, photographs, bills, prices, and plant lists. So Daryl and his wife were able to really go through that material and get the exact plants that he had in here in the same varieties. So what are some of the varieties of plants that he actually planted that are still in this garden today?
Certainly. If I could focus on just one grouping, that would have to be the irises. There are at least 5 varieties of irises which are present in the garden, both in the center terraces, against the house, and in the lower yard. And they're incredibly hardy. Fletcher enjoyed their versatility, enjoyed their seasonality, enjoyed their color, and they have done really, really well, even in transplanting to various places around the house.
I love iris, and they're so short-lived, but they do such a beautiful show. So why don't we go down and look at some of the stone structure that's in the base. Daryl mentioned that Fletcher Steele liked to design garden beds as garden rooms. So you saw the front entryway with the beautiful herringbone path that leads you into the front door with a view of the beautiful backyard. And then you saw the cascading garden beds, which were more of the formal garden. And now we're here on the lower lawn that is beautiful today, but from what I gathered, it had its moments of doubt.
Yeah.
So tell us, Daryl.
Yeah, the lower lawn and garden were a work in progress for a very long time. What we found here, in addition to diseased trees in the upper terrace, we found diseased trees in the lower yard. There were probably 60 or 70 crabapple trees which were planted over the period in the lower yard. To be clear, the adjoining property, which is now an open field, was once an apple orchard. So this is the framework that Helen Gilbert lived in and Fletcher Steele designed in while he was designing the entire garden. For Fletcher, it was important to have an object for the viewer to look at in the distance. In this case, we now have columns and the Persephone statue at the end. But when Helen first met Fletcher and they started on this project, Miss Gilbert did not own the property. He encouraged her to buy more property so the property can get the scale of view that he believed was the most dramatic for the property. When we got here, again, we had diseased trees. We had a lawn which was probably less than 20% of the expanse that we had now. We actually didn't know that there were columns or statues back there. We had no idea because it was all overgrown. It was overgrown with roses which have gone wild. It was overgrown with massive walnut trees and other plant material which had essentially gone to seed and gone wild. And for the first 3 years of our owning the property, we cut and burned to get to a place where we can really see the framework that we were working with in the lower yard. And like I said, we were not living in the 1950s and 60s. We bought the house in 2004, and as a father of 3 young boys, we had modern family boy needs. We needed a lawn that they could play soccer and play baseball. And so our effort was to create that space for them that they could use the garden and the lawns freely, but also maintain the grandeur that Fletcher Steele had intended for the lower yard and property. So
it's beautiful. It looks so peaceful, and I mean, there are so many nice elements with the cascading trees, the bench that you installed, and the specimen trees that are still here that I'm sure that were here when he built this garden.
Yeah, I'd like to point to 2 or 3 specimen trees. In the springtime, the most dramatic of these are the sunburst locusts. They are now possibly 50, 60 feet tall, and unlike most trees which come in light green, the sunburst locusts come in a bright yellow, and they stay yellow against a green backdrop of the oaks and walnuts and other trees which are around. So spring in the backyard is a burst of color, and there are 3 sunburst locusts here.
And the bark is very interesting too. It's not just a flat bark tree. You can take a look at that too.
No, the bark is very special. It brings the kind of interest that it's not just a tree, but there's it's year-round interest simply because of the bark. We have correspondence from Fletcher while he was selecting the trees for the lower garden, in addition to the crab apples and roses. There is a larch back here that Fletcher planted, and he's incredibly proud of it. It's just off to the left. A larch is a deciduous evergreen, so it loses its leaves in the winter. And Fletcher was proud that he was able to find one. And he was able to situate it here in the garden, and the correspondence between he and Helen Gilbert was him saying, "You are the only one in Milton with a larch in your garden," just to say how special he treated every particular space for the needs of his clients. So for us, the symmetry that we unearthed after we started to clear and burn and to create the lawn for our children to play on, it's reinforced by the sunburst locusts, the large ones on either side. Then the eye is taken again once more to walnut trees just inside of that, and then to the columns, and then subsequently Persephone, actually Greek versus Roman on that one.
Was it Minerva? Who was the one with the snakes coming out of her head?
Medusa.
Medusa.
Yeah. So Persephone is Greek. Minerva is Roman. That's a difference. It's still the goddess of spring.
That's close.
And you asked earlier, why would there be columns and a statue in this garden? And I think it was important to say at the time when Helen Gilbert and Fletcher was building this over the 10 years, they were designing an incredibly formal garden. So the cascading center terrace, the symmetry, the columns and the statues would have been important for a formal garden. Fast forward 60 odd years to us, we didn't need a French formal garden. We are more an informal garden. It's more and more on the English side, where we have smatterings of colors of the same things all over the place. And we're looking for plant material which really work in this climate, rather than plant materials which he thinks would be nice to have in the formal garden. So for us, variegated, we have a variegated and a oh my goodness, can't think of it.
Dogwood.
Thank you. A variegated dogwood there. The Samaritan is the particular genus. So we have a number of dogwoods here. The crab apples didn't seem to work best here. So we looked for plant materials which work here. So a Cercis redbud does incredibly well in this climate. The oak leaf hydrangeas do unbelievably well in this climate. And the variety of hosta we found can take a number of different soil types and both sun and shade types, which we are really proud to have work here. In addition to daylilies, we found that those also bring vibrant colors throughout. And some of my other favorites, sort of a red twig dogwood, which we have deep in the back, as well as yellow twig dogwood. So during the winter, when you have a blanket of snow in the lower yard, what you have is the red twigs coming out of the back forest, which continues to drag the viewer's eye to the end of the property as Fletcher intended.
And that's the thing about gardening. Sometimes things work and sometimes they don't, but it always gives you the opportunity to go out and buy new plants. And you clearly don't have deer in your yard, because those hosta are beautiful. And hosta is usually just an open salad bar to Bambi. So well done.
Thank you very much.
So this is the backyard. Thank you for sharing the backyard. Now I'd love to go sit up on the terrace and have that glass of rosé.
Yeah, it's the best way to enjoy a garden, with a glass of wine in hand. So let's go do that.
Yes, it is. Well, this is a very nice way to enjoy a garden. Daryl, thank you so much for opening up your home and your garden to this show.
Christine, it's our pleasure.
And as I mentioned, Daryl's garden is one of the featured gardens on the open day tours from the Wakefield Estates Garden Conservancy Days on June 9th. So if you haven't been on one of those tours, you should definitely go. You can purchase your tickets at the Wakefield Estate or online. So that's June 9th, 2018. There's still time. And
well, this is the right way to enjoy a garden. So
yes.
Thank you very much for stopping by. Cheers.